Hello and welcome. My name is Jason Baum. Today we're talking about humans on the AI Time Journal podcast. Thanks for joining me. As I said, I'm Jason Baum. I am the Director of Member Experience at DevOps Institute. I'm also the host of the Humans of DevOps podcast series. So, as you could tell, it's all about humans for me. I'm a community builder, people connector, and conversationalist by trade. So, on this All About Humans series of the AI Time Journal podcast, we're going to dig deep, get to know the people behind the tech, behind the data, and behind the AI. My guest today is Suman Kanuganti. Suman is the co-founder and CEO at Personal.ai, a new collaboration network that enables a creators community to access time, knowledge, and creativity via their own personal AI. Personal AI is a true digital extension of a creator, trained on their own data and reflective of their unique voice. Combined with Web3 tech, Personal.ai is enabling a new creator economy by reimagining how people create, collaborate, and monetize their creativity. Suman is a creator and entrepreneur that is passionate about solving problems for humans by converging multiple emerging technologies. His experience spans open source projects, blockchain, robotics, AI, AR, wearable tech, video streaming, and fintech. Previous to Personal AI, Suman also founded Ira Tech, recognized as one of Time Magazine's best inventions and Fast Company's world-changing ideas, where he scaled AI and AR tech to assist the blind and low-vision community. Suman is a recipient of many prestigious awards, including SDBJ's 40 Under 40 and the Smithsonian's Top Inventors, as well as UCSD's Rady School of Management's Influential Leaders. He's been featured on CNN, New York Times, CNBC, and Forbes. Suman holds his BE degree in engineering, MS in robotics, MBA in entrepreneurship, and 10 patents in emerging technologies as well. He loves exploring, inspiring thought leaders, writers, investors, and content creators on the creative potential of AI in Web3. Suman, welcome to All About Human series of the AI Time Journal podcast. I don't know how you found the time. I don't know how you found the time to sleep, let alone come on the podcast. So thank you for coming on and joining me.
Thank you, Jason. Thanks for having me. And that sounds like a long bio, so I should shorten it very soon.
I think you sound very important to me, so maybe not. I think it's great, and you certainly do a lot. Thank you for your work with Ira Tech. That's fantastic. As someone who knows a few people who are vision impaired, I really appreciate the fact that you created that. And let's dive right in and talk about AI in Web3. So Web3, this has been like you're hearing so much more about Web3. It is certainly, I don't want to call it trendy because it's not a trend. It's obviously here to stay, but or I guess that's a fad, but it is a trend. But AI in Web3 specifically, let's talk that. What does that mean, and why AI in Web3?
Yeah, thank you. I think let's kick it off. So I think we can talk about AI in Web3 with understanding what Web3 stands for. Um, so if you think about Web 1, Web 2, and Web 3 and the generations of this technological evolution, if you will, Web 1 was mostly about few people such as governments and institutions creating the data, but that many consumers actually were utilizing it. It's mostly like a read-only internet, if you will. And as the access to the hardwares and servers and personal computers came along, and many organizations, startups came along, the internet has evolved into more like a read-write with the applications, mobile phones, and web applications, and so forth. A good example is anywhere from social media to Uber apps to bank apps that we all use. So the idea of the Web3 is essentially shifting from further access to the data. So Web2 was all about access to sort of the hardware and as well as the utility that internet provides. And Web3 is all about access to the data, because now much of the data that creates a utility today is kind of locked into the platforms. So Web3, from my perspective, is fundamentally driven by the data ownership that goes to the individuals. Now, what is AI? AI traditionally, as we know, is a good number of algorithms that create some utility on the aggregation of data. So over the past 10 years, or even 20 years for that matter, the platforms who has access to all this data has been creating tons and tons of utility, for the platforms. That's great because consumers had good experiences such as recommendation systems and Amazon showing you what products you need to buy, or Google showing you what you may be interested in and things of the nature. But in most cases, that AI is used for the benefit of the platforms itself, and AI is all about algorithms and built up the data. Now, if you start thinking about making that connection, Web3 is all about data ownership. Well, to fundamentally extract the utility of that data that you own, you need AI. And that's what AI in Web3 is all about from my perspective.
And that's where it's married. I believe on the last human series that I did with Varun Ganapathy, he summarized AI for me in in a way I could understand it. I mean, everybody know you have these thoughts of AI, right? And I
Sure.
always joke about the Terminator movies and things like that. You know, the machines are coming to get us. He said AI is the problem. When it's solved, it's no longer AI. I thought that was such an interesting way to. I have never
That's a
heard
good way
that
to say it.
before.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I thought that was fascinating to hear because there's so many applications, right? When
Uh-huh.
you say
Mhm.
AI, what are you talking about? I mean, it could be
Exactly,
so
exactly.
many different things.
So many different applications.
Yeah. So with the advent and development of Web3, in conjunction with the emergence of the Internet of Things landscape, do you believe regular consumers will now have access to AI powered technologies and softwares that wouldn't have been accessible before?
Yeah, and that's exactly the thesis behind this company. Personal AI fundamentally is about creating AIs for people. Um, so if you also think about like traditionally what is happening in the space of computing, the big mainframes to personal computers to mobile phones to even now IoT. IoT is also further miniaturization, if you will, to the sensor and connected IoT specifically, where you have sensors that has access to the internet, where they are continuously capturing the data. For example, your Apple Watch is continuously pushing my biometric data, right? I don't even do anything. You are not uh, like actively doing anything to capture this data. So I think as these devices get smaller and smaller, as this device gets closer and closer to us into our homes, such as Alexa devices, and to our, you know, bodies, such as wearable devices, there is fundamentally more data capture that becomes easier. Now, with Web3, the idea of the data capture is that you own that data, right? So imagine all the data that you are ever producing in a day. Your conversations that you're having with me on this internet, it is going into the Zoom platform. The podcast that you probably is going to distribute it on, somebody else will own it. You probably will write a blog on some other platform and they will own that piece of data. So if you think about even the Apple Watch that you're wearing, the biometric information is stored in Amazon. So,
Right
so,
here.
so if you
And I'm
fundamentally,
sitting next to an Amazon device that I can't say the name of. So yeah.
So fundamentally, if you think about all this data that we are creating individually, if you sort of like aggregate that not from a platform centric, but from an individual perspective, which is like all this JSON's data that is, you know, put together into one stack, if you will, a data stack. We call it memory stack. And then you start to now understand, okay, what does this data do to JSON? If we are able to bring that AI to them. And even from AI over the past decade, the algorithms has been getting better and better, smarter and smarter. We don't need gigantic machines to extract fundamental utility that individual humans need. So I think a combination of what's happening with the hardware devices, edge computing, plus combination of algorithms that are super sophisticated, plus this idea of like the data ownership that belongs to the individual, I think there is a shift on how this AI can fundamentally create much more utility and solve the problems for people, for humans.
I like looking at it that way. I hear all I ever hear, from those who might not be in the know is having that much data about them is scary.
Mhm.
You're talking about the the positive aspect of it and utilization. What do you say to someone who's like my mother, for example, who literally unplugs her Amazon device and puts it in a drawer and only takes it out when she wants to talk to it because she doesn't want it to listen to her. And then I have to explain, but you have a phone and you
Yeah,
have the watch and you have the so your data's already being captured everywhere else, right?
yeah, it is scary. We should all be scared about it. It is scary because it is not in our hands. We don't know where it is going. We don't have visibility into where this data is stored, how it is being used. We don't have transparency into how the data is interpreted or what kind of information is used against you versus towards you. Now, from the outset, the consumer utility is great, but there are fundamental problems of capturing the data. And why your grandmother is worried is because she's worried about the privacy. She's worried about transparency. She's worried about the control because her life is her. There is a tendency of, this is my life and it belongs to me. And that is exactly the issue that we are talking about in here, and that's the reason why we need this like AI to work in our favor with the data ownership in the context of an individual. It's almost like your asset, your digital asset. It's like your money, right?
Mm-hmm.
Data is money.
Yeah. That's a good way to look at it. It's like the cryptocurrency, right?
Yeah.
It's like it's not being managed by anything.
Uh,
There's really no and that's I think with the fear, right, of putting anything in. It's like, well, where's it actually going? Am I
exactly.
gonna get it back? Or
Yeah.
if something catastrophic happens, is anybody going to pay? Like, banks are insured, and I'm not insured here.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's like the wild west of data.
Yeah. Even early stages when there was movement with cash to bank, I was reading a book on how people were skeptical to put money in the banks because like, oh, God knows who those people behind it are, right? And then people were storing cash under the bed. I guess it
I
still
was just gonna
happens.
say, if you're Italian, there's no such thing as a bank. You have a pillow, and that's what it's for, or burning it under, as we know. So okay, the direct to business consumer model seems like it would inherently benefit from a decentralized landscape, digital landscape, such as the one that Web3 aims to provide. Do you believe Web 3.0 will streamline that direct to customer services on a holistic scale, or are there certain caveats that we as consumers should be wary of?
Mhm. I mean, Web3 fundamentally, the characteristics of Web3 itself is decentralization down to a human, to an individual. Um, so the way I think about the decentralization has been a process. It's not an event. Web3 is not a event that happened, and decentralization needs to happen right now. It's been happening. It is how it's been happening. If we even generally think about the original internet, it was accessible to governments and large institutions because they had access to the mainframes. And we talked about decentralization of the compute down now into our hands with our computers and with our PCs. So like Web 2 was all about a decentralization from government and large institutions to smaller companies, many organizations, and all this number of different companies that were able to do things and create businesses because they had access to internet and they had access to the servers and hardware.
Mm-hmm.
So now internet is a utility. It is in the hands of every individual. So if you think about like Web3 and the blockchain technologies, blockchain is nothing but a further operating system on top of the internet, right? It's connecting all the computers. um, so from a consumer perspective, there was never ever a good time before to think about Web3 is enabling not just the data and the ownership aspect of it, but also the fundamental economy that is driving towards further decentralization. Is all about Web3. So I strongly believe now there are caveats. The caveats are, well, what does wallets mean? Like, I don't understand what wallets means. Where do I store this private keys? What does custodian wallet means, and what does non-custodian wallets means? Do I trust something called Coinbase? Is it my bank? Is it not my bank? Right? So there are questions fundamentally that we need to address when you are thinking about consumers. Consumers at the end of the day, require super amazing, simple UX. It has to make sense, just like the devices that you have at home, which not gonna say a word for right now, but
Thank you.
I guess that's the technological shift and the technological trends that is happening, because even consumers are more aware about the privacy right now. 10, 15 years ago, it's like, Facebook is amazing. I can connect with my friends and family. It's like, oh, how do I download all these 10 years of memories that I've been uploading to the Facebook? Well, you cannot. Even if you can, it's not usable, right? So now there is a shift that is happening, which is people want this utility with the control of their data for them. So
Yeah, Facebook's a great example. Facebook was started and for a bunch of college students. And
mm-hmm.
then as it evolved and they got older, there was a lot of data out there that they're like, I don't want that out there anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I need to
Exactly.
scrub my data. How do I find my data? Like you said, the ownership, right? Because we all aged out of, or maybe not out of Facebook, but we aged out of what we wanted on Facebook, but that
Mm-hmm.
data still exists.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, you kind of touched on the consumer mindset, and, consumers are now beginning to prefer the direct consumer business model for sure. And that's across pretty much all industries. It allows them to find the products they want. They want it instantaneous. They don't want to have to purchase it from an intermediary. They don't want to go to the store. They don't even necessarily want to go to a warehouse. They
Mm-hmm.
want direct from the manufacturer.
Mm-hmm.
And that will likely lead to a change to supply chain management. And given current efforts to integrate blockchain tech into like CSM, how do you think SCM? How do you think that will change with the business to consumer framework?
I mean, I would think about it as like food chain, right? So at the end of the day, uh, every company and the work they do and the tools that they create will trickle down to a consumer, an individual human being. Um, Imagine how many business exists that actually supports Amazon, which is a direct to consumer business, right?
Mm,
But Amazon alone itself is creating so much of like consumer utility that it can actually justify having these other B2B businesses as well. So I think uh, most generally consumers want the direct relationship because they don't want the middleman to kind of feel like, okay, it's a sales process. Like even if you think about Tesla and some of the recent car companies who are very much focused on consumer experience, they don't want to hand off their brand to somebody else,
right.
right? And consumers like it, and companies like it. I think that's the next generation of almost like the companies that are evolving. For me personally, I'm always close to consumers. I mean, my passion itself, as you were reading my long bio, is figuring out this convergence of technologies to solve fundamentally human problems. And when I say human problems, it's the problems that are close to human being, like with their own right. Like for example, in my previous company, Ira, it was about lack of like visual information around them. They can get to point A to point B, but that was not the point. Like visual experiences provide much richer experiences and emotional uplifting for people who can see. Now, for people who are blind, those experiences are lost. So the idea of like using technology to augment those people was fascinating. And in this company, it's about how do you use the technology to kind of augment your own mind, your own digital mind. Is there a digital mind that kind of is an extension of you? It's a version of you, as your own personal AI. um, so I think it's a choice that businesses make in terms of if they are going to go to B2B or not. But fundamentally, everything that happens in the world trickles down to individual utility, because they all need to serve human beings. So that's kind
Yeah.
of how I think about like the food pyramid, like in terms of how the individual businesses are supporting with each other, and direct consumer trust is super important.
Yeah, I mean, with the BDC model, the customers communicate directly with the company, right? So,
Exactly.
like you said, like the brand opportunities, the experience opportunities. Why would you pass that up? Especially
Hmm.
when in today's market, you can have an inferior product, quite frankly, and completely beat your competitor with excellent top tier customer service and experience, because
Exactly.
that's what the customer wants. They
Hmm.
want that more than the fantastic product,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Um, so with that, when they're able to communicate with the company, how will the integration of something like um, machine learning assisted communication through chatbots, automated HR services, all those things affect the communication process?
Yeah. I have a different perspective on that one, given we are building personal AIs. So if we rather thinking about how individual communicates with the chatbots through a company, but flip it around, like is there an opportunity for the company to actually interact with the digital mind of that individual? Like why should the consumer interact with an AI? Why can't the companies actually interact with an AI of an individual? Because technically personal AI is all about creating a digital mind of an individual, and once you have it, it is replicating your thoughts and your ideas and your streams, the data that you own. So in a
Right.
way, I can chat, I can message, I can text Jason's personal AI, and I would get a response in the form, in with the authenticity, with the ownership that you have, from Jason's personal AI. Now imagine being able to rent out for the pieces that you are okay for these corporations to access the portions of your data that will add some economic incentive back to you,
How
right?
would it work? How does that work?
How
Like,
would it how would it work today? You would go onto a Amazon.com website. There are
yeah.
chatbots, and you are interacting with Amazon as a company. Now, in this case, it's not Amazon as a company; it's Jason as an individual person.
So let me give you a scenario, because I actually just went through as a consumer, and this touches because I think frustration that consumers have, right? We're all consumers.
Yep.
I spent a lot of time on a chatbot
Mhm.
with a telemedia services
Yeah.
company. I won't say
Yeah.
which one, but they're one of the largest
Sure.
networks
I can
provider
imagine.
that there is. Okay.
Okay.
Yes. So spending multiple hours
Hmm.
on this chatbot trying to remedy a situation, going through the prompts, going through that process, getting someone live, apparently, through the chatbot, talking about this situation, trying to remedy a situation. No knowledge of previous conversations, no recognition of, I
Hmm.
mean, anything in the past. It's
Yeah.
like you're talking into the abyss sometimes, or you're just
Hmm.
throwing something at a wall,
Yeah.
hoping it sticks.
Exactly.
How
So
do you flip that?
yeah, just think about it for a second. Like just that experience alone. You are talking about a telecommunication company, and you have a specific context that you need to communicate with a human being, which is not in their AI algorithm. They don't know you,
Right.
right? It is not a chatbot that is personal. It is a chatbot that is business oriented, that will ask certain pre-filled questions. It's almost like a different technology. It's like a dialogue system, or it's things that it knows that you are trying to, like, get answers from.
Right.
It will never work. But when you flip it around, if that AI, if that personal AI, if that is your digital mind, that AI has the context, everything that is needed of Jason. It has a richer context. It has context beyond just what data that telecommunication company collected on you, what data that they have about, all the common questions that they get. Does it make sense? Like,
It makes so much sense. How do we get that out there? Let's do it. I'm ready. As a consumer, I'm like, I waste so many hours on this
yeah,
stuff.
our view of the world is over the next decade, every person will be walking with their own personal AIs in their pockets. That personal AIs
Wow.
will become or shift the future of communication, future of the business, future of data access between the people. The negotiation is no more about you giving the data and them using for personal recommendations, but companies asking request or permission to access your AI to provide those kind of services. So it's not going to happen overnight. It's not a, hey, let's do this project in the next month. 1 month we'll have it. But what we can do to begin with is everybody should start caring about the data capture and owning their data. Everybody should care about creating their own AI. So in the future, the more data goes into their AI, the better it is to understand, themselves and develop that as their own digital asset. So I guess my call to action is, let's get people their own personal AIs to begin with. Because once you start having those equations, then we will start to unlock businesses requesting permission to your AI. And there could obviously be some economic incentives around it, but it makes the process much more simpler, which is, if you care about customer experience, if you care about touching the human, that equation has to be flipped 180 degrees.
I love this conversation, where it is going, first of all. And, it reminds me of a keynote that I saw by Aled Miles, who is the CEO of Sauce Labs,
Mm-hmm.
the continuous
Sure.
testing,
Yep.
and he at SauceCon, and he mentions frictionless experiences, right?
Mm-hmm.
Frictionless that we come to now expect
Mm-hmm.
with companies like Uber or Lyft.
Yep.
That's like, I feel like it's an iteration of kind of what obviously what you're talking about is further down the road,
Mm-hmm.
but isn't that kind of like the first step where
Mm-hmm.
the app knows all about what am I doing this for business? Am I doing this for personal? Here's all my credit
Yep.
card information.
Yep.
Here's like a tip, and I could do it, and I don't have to talk to anybody if
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to. It's completely frictionless.
Yeah. So even the like a user experience, the UX, like because we are talking about frictionless, right?
Yeah.
In the example of Uber, let's flip that around and see kind of what could be the possibility. Okay. So now let's imagine, okay, you have your personal AI, because technically it is capturing everything of what you produce, where you are going, what you are seeing, what you are talking, technically creating this like digital mind of your own, and you own the data, and it is yours. You establish the trust with your own AI. Now you open the Uber app. When you open the Uber app, it's like, oh, it's Jason. Oh, looks like he is at this airport. Oh, I know where he is going. And then it looks like, he would enjoy so and so thing in that moment, because it may not be the things that you have done before, because Uber only knows the slice, like a tiny, tiny
The
slice about you.
piece. Yeah.
But they cannot know everything about you, because currently the model is that the data is stored in their servers, right? So that is the shift we are talking about. Now, experience, the utilities will stay. Uber will stay, Lyft will stay. All the experience doesn't have to change. The utilities can stay, but you got to understand and uh, kind of start taking the control of your own life, so that way the companies can start to build the experiences that meaningfully fit. Because I don't think anybody is ill-intended. I think they're doing it for the reasons that exist in the internet today, to create better experiences as such, and they're working with what they have. But if they do have, in that moment, like, I just tell me, Jason, what do where would you like to go, and your AI kind of magically does that. Why not? They will do it.
You're enlightening me here. This is a fascinating conversation. Um, so every business to consumer transaction, generates detailed consumer specific data, which we're talking about. Considering how easy it is to acquire that data, especially in LOT devices being more widely used, how are the consumers assured that the business will protect their private purchasing data, right? We kind of talked about, like, should I be afraid of this? How will they maintain transparency? Especially when certain customers request access or exercise to control their own data.
Mm-hmm. Well, they shouldn't.
I love that. That's a great answer. There you go.
No, so I mean, here is the deal, right? As long as you have large amounts of data that is aggregated and sitting behind something that it's not in your control, there is definitely hacks. There is definitely robberies in the banks. There is definitely stealing of the data that happens. So we can ensure as much as we want, and kind of like create a different businesses all around like trying to stop it, but hacks will still happen, steals will still happen, thefts will still happen. What you can rather do is you can rather try to take some of that responsibility, some of that ownership of the data uh, back to yourself. So my fundamental theory is, if you are worried about something, then you should control it for yourself, right? But the good news is, the idea of Web3, the idea of ownership is shifting from a macro perspective. There are tools that are being created to fundamentally give every individual to own their data. So that way, hey, this belongs to me. If you are using this data, it has a trace back to that particular individual, and there is, a transparency on where the data is being used. So I think we can create all the security protocols, 2FAs, and all the good practices that exist. But if somebody is social engineers and attacks the company and still be able to steal it, they will still able to steal it. Now, doesn't mean that they cannot social engineer individuals. They will do it as well. Um, so I guess, to sum it up, I would generally encourage people to like take more control of their data for themselves. And today's world, uh, the shift is happening because of Web3. The tools are changing. So that's probably a shift that happens.
Thank you. Um, you know, I guess as we're talking about it, I'm wondering what kind of consumer data do businesses already have access to, and that is like prior to consumers purchasing any products. And then what can businesses buy and sell consumer specific data to and from party
Mhm.
providers? Like, what do they have access to? And then what can businesses use? How can they use the data they acquire to conduct targeted marketing campaigns, aim at specific demographics that are more likely to purchase a product?
Yeah. I honestly don't know. I don't know the I don't know the depth of all the different possibilities that businesses and companies acquire. But what I know is there are a whole bunch of businesses that are simply in the business of data collection and then selling it to the big companies and other businesses and feeding it in as well. Even if you think about like just simply going to the conferences, no offense, but you probably don't know that your data is being sold, and it's probably hidden somewhere behind the terms of service and privacy service. And then once you come back, you are bombarded with emails because somebody else is trying to sell something. So I think there is the thing is, things have worked like dramatically in our favor during the early days of Web 2, and we had like tons of good experiences. And it's not scaling anymore. It's not scaling to the needs of the human beings because they are feeling overwhelmed. They are feeling everybody is trying to sell them something. They are feeling, this is not relevant to me anymore because the algorithms are getting confused with like too much aggregation, too much cross-linking, too much backlinking. um, and the idea of like selling the data between each other, if you have like a new column that has new like address information or some other information about millions of consumer, then that becomes a source for making a little bit more money. So I think that will continue to happen until consumers themselves will start taking actions and be careful about like what data they're putting in, where they are putting in that piece of data. Can we stop the individual businesses collecting and selling the data to others? I mean, why would they stop if there is money involved?
Right. Yep. Good. I mean, Google's been doing it for a long time. Facebook's been doing it for a long time. Yeah, it's
That's why I think about it as like a further decentralization of the economy, right? The
mhm,
decentralization happened, and then you know even Facebook was a startup, Google was a startup, everybody was a startup at the beginning, and they had good
right,
intentions. They
right.
created good utility, and they created amazing experiences. Are you kidding me? They're amazing experiences. But now people are now starting to worry about, okay, hang on, I don't want this, I don't want that. There are like conditions, there are
Yeah,
issues, bias and false information. Now they want to control, they want more control about how things are happening, right? So it always builds on, I guess, past experiences, I guess, for humanity overall.
hmm
um, and uh, and I think we just had to look at the bright side on what can be done incrementally to fix the continuous set of issues that we will see. I'm not saying Web3 will solve everything, because once we get to Web3, it's like, okay, hang on. I don't understand where this case. I don't want to lose my keys. Now you have to create a new set of businesses that goes into Web4. So,
I think of, when I'm thinking about this question, when I think about as you're talking, it reminds me of this talk I went to at the Google offices in Manhattan, um, and it was new ways to use data for marketing. And on the marketing side, you hear about all the, hey, I have a way for you to not only know what product someone likes, but I could tell you where they live. Hell, I could tell you the building they're at, the floor they're on, and I
uh-huh.
could tell you how old they are, how many kids they have, their income level. I mean, the marketing guys are like, yeah,
Yeah.
give it to me, right? But then the personal side of me is like, well, this is terrifying, like terrifying.
I
That
think there
someone,
is a win-win situation there. It doesn't have to be like one side, right? It doesn't have to be terrifying. Meaning, if you indeed are looking for a specific, I don't know, like you have a new baby and you're looking for new baby products,
Mhm.
that if that context lives within your like within your control, within your own personal AI, and if the companies will start to use that in that moment, in that context, because everything is time bound, right? Like your life
Right,
is time bound. So it's not just this, oh, hang on, this person has a baby, but that baby is 6 years old now. I don't need milk bottles anymore. You know what I mean? Like there is a
right.
context that goes with it. So I think um, there is definitely a better, you know, way of having marketers do their thing and target properly, but at the same time give that control a little bit to the consumer, so that way they can be marketed to
Right.
properly, in the context, so that way they're not pissed off, they're not worried about like, oh fuck, where did you get this data, right?
I think Facebook and Twitter are starting to do that better.
Yeah.
At least I could say, hey, this ad is not relevant, right? That's the
Yep.
beginning of it.
Exactly, that's the beginning.
Yep, absolutely. Suman, I feel like we could talk about this forever. I so appreciate your time for coming on the podcast, talking to us a little bit about, personal AI, what you're doing, and is there anything you want to add before we take off about personal AI?
um well, I think we are in the early stages of creating people's digital minds, and we are doing it with the data ownership, with the economic principles, with the utility to the consumers and to the people. So if you do are interested in, helping the company out, being the thought leader of creating your personal AIs, um, please join us. Please join us at personal.ai.
I love that. Suman, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Jason.
And thank you so much for joining us for this All About Human series at the AI Time Journal podcast. I'm Jason Baum. If you're in the DevOps space, please visit DevOpsInstitute.com to join our community. Until next time, stay safe, stay healthy, and most of all, stay human, live long. Where's the camera? Live long and prosper. Thanks so much. Bye bye.
Cool.